Okay, well, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining this CIWEM Breakfast webinar series. Today we're going to be looking at, this is part 2, looking at the A2 competency. Okay, so I'm just going to start by telling you a little bit about myself, and there are also 2 other presenters on the call. So my name is Katherine Woollard. I'm a Water Resources Management Plan Specialist at Thames Water. I've been working at Thames Water now for the past 3 years. I previously worked at South East Water for 4 years, and before that worked at the British Geological Survey, always working within water resources, specifically in modelling. I previously did a MSc with Cranfield University in environmental water management, and that was a course accredited by CIWEM, so that's what first got me involved in CIWEM around 7 years ago. I became chartered in 2019 as a chartered water and environment manager, and there were just 2 points, personal points I wanted to share with you all today from my journey to chartership. So I actually became chartered in March last year, and when I was about to go off on maternity leave. I was actually 7 months pregnant when I had my professional review interview. Where I thought that was applicable to you all really was it was the kind of change in pace for me, kind of handing over for my maternity leave, starting to wind down, that gave me the headspace and the time to work on my chartership application. Because I mean, it can be so challenging trying to fit your day-to-day activities, family life, etc. in your day and the number of hours in the day as it is without trying to work on a charter application on top of that. So what we wanted to do, part of this series, is there's an opportunity here as part of the lockdown to use the time you would have spent commuting to get that headspace and to work on your application. So that's something we're really trying to promote here today and through the next 11 weeks. Also through my own journey to chartership, as part of my continued professional development and looking to get the 30 hours each year, which we'll come on to talk about in a later session. I think it's the final one of the series. I attended the Rivers and Coastal Group weekend away, and I had the opportunity to have a one-to-one with Terry Fuller, who's the Chief Executive of CIWEM. And I said to him, you know, I've got 5 years experience in the industry, not quite sure it's enough. And the really good bit of advice that he gave to me that I wanted to share with you all was just take the competencies, align your experience to date, and if you have enough experience and you're hitting those competencies, then just go for it. Don't worry that you don't have, you know, the experience. If you're hitting those competencies, you do. And for me, that gave me the confidence to think, right, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go for it next year. And again, hopefully for you all, this series is an opportunity to kind of kickstart that momentum for you and to give you the confidence as we break down the competencies week on week, to align your experience to those competencies and to make, you know, give you the confidence to think, yes, I do have enough and, you know, I can now go and submit. There is an August date for applications as the next one coming up at the end of summer. So we think these 11 weeks feeds quite nicely towards that date. But again, we can touch on that later. So just about the branch of the group, Jack, who again I mentioned, so sorry to talk through. So the other presenters on the call are Jack Southern. So he's Associate Director for Capita Property and Infrastructure. He's in the Environment Division. Jack actually ran the year to chartership with CIWEM back in 2018, which again helped me structure my own application and was kind of formed inspiration for this series. Jack presented last week on the A1 competency, so knowledge of wider environmental issues and trends, which I'm going to be building on today. And Ian Stevenson's also on the call, so he's one of my colleagues at Thames Water, and he's a strategic modelling specialist at Thames, and he'll be presenting next week on B2, the ability to analyse and evaluate water problems. So we're taking it in turns over the 12-week period to present on each of the competencies. So Jack last week, for those that didn't have the opportunity to join last week, Jack's presentation and associated materials are now currently on the CIWEM events page. So you can log on there and listen back to Jack's presentation. That's a lot of the introductory bit on there to this series, so I won't rehash all of that. But I will just say that this is coming from the Metropolitan branch, which the 3 of us are all members of. And the aim of this series is to encourage more of our experienced graduate members and colleagues to pursue their chartered membership. So just a run through what the scheme is. It's a voluntary scheme run by the branch, encouragement and support for you all. It's for experienced colleagues seeking chartered membership, equipping applicants with the knowledge and the confidence, focus on the application process and a support network for you. What it isn't is not a guarantee of membership after completing the programme, and some self-assembly is required. What I just wanted to note there is I was looking through the CIWEM website yesterday. There is actually a workbook available which lays out all of the competencies and within an Excel spreadsheet with columns for evidence, progress against the competencies, and a column for your mentor or sponsor to feed back into how you're progressing. And I just thought that was quite useful. It says some self-assembly required. There's a framework there on the CIWEM website, and we can post that as part of the supporting material for this series. So I'll make sure that happens if you would like access to that for additional support. So this is an overview of the 12 weeks. As I mentioned, we're going to be running through 12 competencies over 12 weeks. Jack presented on A1 last week. I'll be building on A1 with A2 this week. And we're not covering D1 or E2, as these are the ability to communicate in English and also your commitment to CIWEM, ability to communicate in English, fairly self-explanatory and quite short in your application. Commitment to CIWEM, very personal, so really for you as individuals to pull that one together. So what we need from you to opt in, if you've not already done so, please book onto next week's and subsequent webinars via the CIWEM events page, so that the connection details come through to you. Just to say that this week there is, and going forward, there's a 24-hour cut-off period, so please do make sure that you book well in advance, just because of the numbers of people we're getting through. To participate in this, engage with the activities that are set week on week. We're hoping to set a forum up to encourage participation. That's not quite there yet. We'll let you know when that's available. And also just hoping that you'll follow this through, and hopefully this will help you keep your momentum as you work towards chartership, possibly in August if you choose to if you do choose to submit at that point. And then to feedback. So we're constantly developing the materials for this scheme, so any feedback on the information sheets, webinar sessions or any other aspect of the scheme is welcome at any point, and there will be a survey at the end, so please do engage with that and submit it afterwards so that we can continue to improve the material we're sending out. So today we're focusing on Competency A2, so the ability to develop strategies or plans to address changes in your sector. I think this one can be quite intimidating when you first look at it, but I think when you start breaking it down into the key questions, it becomes quite clear what CIWEM are asking for from this competency. So you will need to demonstrate that you can identify, monitor and review changes. So changes is linking back to the changes that Jack went through as part of the A1 competency last week. So you need to demonstrate you can identify, monitor and review changes within your sector by preparing strategy at a personal, team and or organisational level. The impact of the change on the individual, team, organisational workloads and revenues should be identified, and you should demonstrate your ability to put appropriate planning frameworks in place to prepare for change. You'll be able to identify gaps in your knowledge and information and be able to conduct appropriate research. So as a kind of exam question, that does feel, quite a lot, but hopefully as we break this through the key questions, it will start to become clear what they're looking for here. So the first key question is, what are the main changes affecting your sector and how do you keep your knowledge up to date? So that's where we're linking back to Jack's presentation on the A1 competency last week. And talking about the key changes within the sector being climate change, new technology and energy. And really, if you're talking through this, how you're keeping up to date with those different changes and looking ahead with those changes in the sector, you should be hitting that bang on. So the second key question, what frameworks do you have in place to help you plan and prepare for future changes and to identify that further information is required? And what strategies have you devised and implemented to address these changes or to help your employer or clients evolve to meet external pressures? So there are additional key questions, and these are all listed in the guidance that go alongside the competencies as well, which again we can make available on the website along with these slides. So breaking this down more personally, and if you start thinking about this in the context of your role and previous roles that you've held, how does your work help to achieve the company strategy? What strategies does your employer have in place to address external challenges? And how do you contribute to the achievement of these strategic aims or goals? Have you developed a new standard, system or service which has been adopted for a future strategy? What actions, initiatives have you developed and implemented to address changes and/or developments? Have they been adopted by other members of your team or organisation? And have you established a programme of research or investigation to supplement existing information? So to help you again work through, so you've got the kind of competency, what that means, and then the key questions there, and then we just wanted to provide you with some generic examples to quite help you structure the answer. So it's your competency report will be 4,000 words, and you'll break that down, those 4,000 words, between the 12 competencies. So it works, and the word count will vary depending on, you know, the different competency. For example, ability to communicate in English will be less of a word count than one of these kind of more meatier examples. So these hopefully generic examples here will just help you structure for this particular competency your answer. So the first bullet point here is identify and monitor changes in the sector through regular attendance at team meetings, by reviewing relevant journals, so asking you to insert examples there, industry publications, again with examples, attending seminars and conferences, and liaising with regulatory bodies and clients. So that's how you're kind of monitoring, reviewing those changes in your sector. Then moving on to the second bullet point, I ensure that I advise colleagues of any changes in legislation or guidance that I come across, and then examples of that communicating back to others. And then the last bullet point here, I advised, so name of a client, and the implications of, again, name of regulation or policy for a particular project. And then this meant that there was a benefit resulting from your advice. So that's the kind of structure we're looking for. And the way I look at it is, for this competency, you need to identify the change, how you're monitoring and reviewing that and looking ahead with it. Think about the strategy or framework that you personally, because for these competencies you need to be talking in the first person, that you've used or put in place or thought through, and then the impact of that's had on others, your team, your organisation. So on this slide, we're just looking at some personal examples that have come from others who have submitted and been successful in their chartership applications. So the first one here is, I attend and present at my company's annual environmental impact assessment community of practice meeting to understand and disseminate changes in legislation, guidance, innovation and best practice. So the change there is that environmental impact assessment framework will be changing year on year. And the strategy is to keep abreast of that and then present at a company's annual meeting. And the impact of that is that you're communicating out those changes in legislation to the wider group. The next example, I have been developing flooding guidelines in response to growing pressure to develop on floodplains. I've been testing and appraising a project that I'm currently working on against the guidelines, and I've been involved in the development of flowcharts for ease of access to the guidelines by non-technical operators. So again, there is a change, which is the pressure to develop on floodplains. The strategy framework is to develop the guidelines to respond to that, and the impact that that's having is that you are able to apply it to current projects and also communicate it back clearly to others and non-technical operators. The final example here is, my technical work involves the use of hydraulic modelling software. I've monitored through research changes in software availability and client desire. My strategy to achieve and manage this change has been to develop my existing skill set and modelling capability to ensure innovative project delivery at the forefront of my industry. I've also led my team's development by undertaking specialist training and development. So here it's a technological change, so software availability, and keeping abreast of those technological changes, and developing the skill set as a strategy, and also developing the skill set of others, and then ensuring that your project delivery is innovative is another impact there. So just these two examples moving on are really quite water industry specific, which is something that we're kind of trying to bring into this series alongside kind of more environmental examples. So for the water industry, really the big main environmental changes moving forward, climate change, increasing population, and environmental pressures resulting in the need to reduce water abstraction from rivers are all driving a lot, most of the activity in the water industry, particularly in water resources and asset management. So these two examples, those pressures and changes moving forward have shaped my hydraulic modelling strategy. So reviewing and updating modelling methodology to better understand the capacity and storage of the water network required to meet growth over the next century, and risk assessing the effect of hot, dry summers and future growth scenarios to assess capital schemes, ensuring appropriate planning of future assets through the planning horizon. So those headline changes that are impacting the water industry, and then strategy framework, looking at what methodologies you have in place and then how you can improve those methodologies, and then the impact of that. And also the strategy to kind of, change your direction of travel in terms of the modelling work that you're doing, and the impact of that actually, the schemes that you're putting in the ground, and people using those methodologies going forwards to ensure they're addressing those changes. The other big ticket item for water companies, water management plan, regulatory requirement to submit one every 5 years. So in this example, I have shaped and delivered the supply component of the Water Resources Management Plan for WMP 19, so for the last plan. The change there is reviewing the guidance and attending conferences and modelling groups and liaising with regulatory bodies to keep abreast of changes both in regulatory drivers and also the wider changes in the industry. And then the impact there is delivering a legally compliant aspect to this required regulatory submission. Okay, so we've run through the competency. We've looked at the key questions, which you can start to think about in the context of your current role and previous roles that you may have held. Looked at some generic examples of how you might structure your response. And we've looked at some personal examples from people who have submitted their chartership applications and been successful with the structure of what changes are there in your sector, what strategies, frameworks you've put in place, and what impact that has. So the activity that we're looking for today is for you to discuss with your peers or on the forum, which we will get hopefully set up quite soon. So what changes, for example, legislation, policy, or innovation, have you researched in order to understand the implications for the work that you do, the implications for your company, and the implications for a client or project that you are working with or on? And then following on from those, what action did you take personally? What strategy and framework did you put in place? And also, what positive outcome did your action and advice result in? And what impact did it have on others? A couple of other points to think about. Have you set up or are you responsible for maintaining any change logs or registers, and what benefits do these provide? And how does your company ensure that any changes in your sector are communicated amongst all those who need to be aware of them? And how have you personally contributed to this? So if you have a bit of a think about that, discussion around those today, then this week you can then spend 15 minutes answering the key questions we've discussed today, and just prepare 5 bullet points to demonstrate the changes that you have identified in your sector and the strategies and plans that you've developed to address these. And then hopefully that will help you structure and have an answer to that A2 competency this week. So just a couple of tips. So as you've mentioned, always write in the first person. So CIWEM are only interested in what you have done, not what your team has done. Be honest about what you've contributed to a project. Understand why you're doing a particular task. What's the bigger picture? And I think linking back to the A1 competency will help there. Be concise. Remember what you have written, and don't limit yourself to experience gained within your current employer or paid employment. What you've done previously is just as valid. And I think that workbook, which we'll make available online, will provide a structure for you if you would like to access that as well. So this 12-week series is really focusing on CIWEM, so Chartered Water and Environmental Manager, and chartership application for that. We do also want to provide some cross-referencing to other accreditations. So for me personally, I'm still looking to work towards Chartered Environmentalist, so still be aligning my PDR against those objectives moving forward, so useful for me here. So yeah, for cross-referencing, Chartered Environmentalist A2, so applying knowledge, environmental knowledge and principles in pursuit of sustainable environmental management in professional practice, and B2, promoting a strategic environmental approach. So you can see the links there to the C.WEM A2 competency. And then for Chartered Engineer, A1, maintain and extend a sound theoretical approach in enabling the introduction and exploitation of new and advancing technology and other relevant developments. And A2, engage in the creative and innovative development of engineering technology and continuous improvement systems. And then finally, for Chartered Scientists, the link is to A1, use a combination of general knowledge, understanding and skills to optimize and engage in the application of existing and emerging science and technology. So that completes the A2 competency, part 2 of the series. Just to reiterate that if you are interested in, keeping momentum with your application and continuing with the series, the next call will be next Wednesday, 8:30 till 9, and we'll be Ian will be presenting on B1, so the ability to analyse and evaluate environmental and/or water problems. So what I haven't been doing through this is monitoring the Q&A. So I don't know if Jack and Ian, you'd be able to come onto the call, yes. And hopefully they've been monitoring the questions as they've been coming through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great.
So if we start with, sorry about any background noise, the sort of the A1, A2 focus ones, and then work on to the wider questions. So we've had a question saying, did you use one example or project to cover both A1 or A2, or would you recommend using a couple of smaller examples?
Yeah, you need to be using new examples for both A1 and A2. I mean, obviously the umbrella environmental changes and pressures that you're working under will be similar, but the actual examples of how you're applying those need to be fresh in A2. So A1's kind of focusing on those changes, and the A2 is the application of what you've done to address those through strategy and frameworks that you've put in place. And the other thing I'd like to say is for each competency, you're really looking for 2 examples, but a bit of advice I had from my mentor was focus on one really good example, and the second one can be slightly lesser. It doesn't need to be quite as much as the first if you are struggling to get that second example.
Also, we've had a request, could we put the activities, like this week's, the things to do today slide back up, if you go back a few, just whilst we're talking through the rest of the questions?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Let me just answer that one. Done. So there's another question about where will today's slides be located on the CIWEM website. I'm very pleased that we've got a special page been built for this webinar series, which has got last week's recording. I couldn't tell you the address off the top of my head, but if you go onto LinkedIn and look at the CIWEM profile or look at my profile, there's links to it, both of those, and we'll share that again. There is a thank you for all dialing in, and you will be sent a survey link. So if you could be so kind to fill that in, and hopefully we can get posted in that somewhere, or for next time, the website with our link in it as well.
So it's on the CIWEM events page. If you go, this series is quite high profile on that events page, and there's a link to Jack's presentation last week and the associated materials there as well.
So these ones are slightly off A1, but we'll go from in no particular order. I've recently changed roles. I'm looking to apply in August. What advice do you have for writing the competencies to sound consistent between the 2 roles?
Yeah, I mean, all of the experience that you have is valid. Please draw on all of it. If you can maintain a story throughout, so why, the reason that you've changed roles and kind of pulling that out. I mean, for me, for example, I moved from a smaller water company to a larger water company and moved to increase my technical ability. So whereas project managing consultants went to actually running models, and I did pull that through and, you know, keeping abreast of the latest technology, modeling techniques, and developing personally there. So you can weave a story into it, but it doesn't need to be that. They can be discrete examples from your previous role, and if it's a completely different role doing now, that's fine. Just draw on examples from that as well.
I think just to add to that, I think, you know, looking at the two roles, you could show breadth in there. Quite often, you know, a lot of applications come through from consultants, and they work on quite a wide range of projects, you know, responding to the demand. So rather than having a particular role within an organisation, they respond to what opportunities come forward. So I don't be worried about them being a bit diverse. I think particularly things like A1. Wide environmental knowledge, you'll be able to show that a lot easier. There's an aligned question here as well. So when working in a related sector, and this individual is in education, do all of your examples of competency have to be specific to water and environment related? Most of the competencies are in this sector for this individual, but their role and competency is further than just water environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the focus, if you're working in water environment now, you know, that's where CIWEM sits to support people within the water industry and the environment industry and that wider piece. So as applicable to that as you can make it, but do not restrict yourself to that, because, you know, the transferable skills and the strategies and frameworks, for example, for this competency that you may have put in place in the education sector are equally as valid. So I think trying to pull it back to, you know, the environmental bit if possible, but not leaving out that valid experience as well, would be my advice. Yeah,
I think certainly. So things like the A competencies, whereas looking at knowledge, there is a sort of implicit suggestion that would be water environment related, and hopefully, as you say, you've got that. I think perhaps when you go on to the B's and the C's, when it's looking at managing change and responding to those sorts of things, I think you could look at those other examples there, where it's about your ability to respond to that situation, because the competency doesn't necessarily speak directly to those, and it's a general competency there. But yeah, the overall theme for water environment would be great. Okay, let me just click that one off. I've done that one as well. Hold on. So for someone whose work has not been neck deep involved in water resources but safety, how would you advise their chartered engineer application be shaped?
Yeah, I mean, I think, sorry, Derek, if you want
to. No, go on. If you're comfortable with that one.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was going to say, I mean, I think it's really a case, and hopefully, you know, this series will help you with this, of working through the competencies and just trying to align your experience with those competencies. So there is a health and safety competency, which I'm sure, you know, you'll have lots of examples and pass with flying colours, but you do need to have the experience to hit the others as well. And you'll only know that when you start to align your experience to them. It may be that, you know, you do have a couple of gaps, and what you can then do is maybe August is too soon for you and you can look ahead, you know, and try and tailor your experience going forward. Or it may be that, you know, you do have enough examples from the role that you've had to align with those competencies, in which case you're ready to go. So I think once you start aligning, then you'll see if you're ready or if you're not.
Yeah, I think specifically looking at the chartered engineer application as well, there's quite a lot in safety, and if you're working in a sort of a CPD, a CDM area, then there's quite a lot you can make of that, which will help support that application. But just look at those chartered competencies as well. Our next question then is, are DWI regulation changes relevant to for the competence, knowing they might not be immediately obviously climate change or environment related?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So anything legislation, regulatory drivers, all of that really good stuff. Yeah, we were just pulling a few examples out here. So please don't be limited to what's in the slides, and absolutely, you know, DWI legislation, regulation, key and important to include. Yep.
Yeah, I think we were just trying to emphasize if you were struggling for ideas, then climate change, technology, and the other one, which I can't remember now, were good good examples of where you could do that, but don't limit yourself, as Kate says. Going back again to CPD, then the CPD record asks for 3 years. I can provide more than 3 years, but the third year would show 30 hours. Would not show 30 hours as I was writing up a PhD as well as working full time. Perhaps what I'd suggest to that one is we're going to cover CPD in a later presentation, but I wouldn't be put off looking at it for now. If you've been working full time and also writing up a PhD, I think there probably is quite a lot of CPD you've been doing, but you just perhaps haven't recognised it in terms of wider reading. It might not be formal training courses or conferences that you've been going to, but there is a lot of CPD that people do, which, you know, non-traditional. And I think as we look in this lockdown period, we're all accessing a lot more non-traditional CPD. We're not attending conferences and things as much anymore. Sorry, Katie. So
Great.
there's
Okay.
also.
Well,
Go on. Are we?
No, I was just saying we're at 9:02 now, so I
Okay.
don't know if there are many more questions or if we're looking to
there's a couple more. I'll just try and catch these. So you talked about changes within the sector, which are generally applicable to most companies as you climate change. However, could I talk about ones which only affect a few companies? Yes, absolutely. Responding to new framework agreements, absolutely. Yeah. As I say, don't limit yourself. Regarding activity, are we to prepare an answer for you to provide feedback? So unfortunately, we are not able to respond to the people. We've had sort of 200 people log on today, so it's really for you to discuss with your peers, but there is a charged CIWEM service that you can get feedback from, which will provide more details. Can I write the same example? Oh, I've done that one. Yeah, okay, that's pretty much it. I'll go through the rest of the comments
and just
type some answers in. Thank you.
Katie,
Yeah,
Katie,
great.
if you do have a minute, there was a question at the very start that was about maternity leave, and it says, if you have recently returned from maternity leave, is there any way that your CPA hours can be split over more years, or do you have to wait 2 years until you apply?
Yeah, so I actually I had the same query. So I think if you contact CIWEM HQ, they can talk you through that. I returned after 6 months, so I've tried to do my 30 hours since returning. When I talked to them, I think, you know, I could have done 15 and that would be fine. But I think it's, if you haven't done the 30 hours because you've been on maternity leave, that's okay. And then you'll just look back at what CPD you've done before that. But it really kind of comes down to, you know, the personal situation and just showing, I mean, if you've been working right up to your maternity leave and then you haven't done anything through those 12 months, showing your commitment up to that point is absolutely valid. And then you can pick up and hit the ground running when you get back. So it really does depend on your personal situation. But yeah, if you have a chat with CIWEM HQ, they can talk you through career break and how it works with your maternity leave. Some people go for their chartership while they're on maternity leave. So there are lots of different options for you. Okay, great. Thanks so much everyone for joining, and I'll just go to the last slide. So yeah, just a reminder, please do book on to next Wednesday's session with Ian, and we'll be covering B1, ability to analyse and evaluate environmental and or water problems. Please engage with the activities from today. The slides will be up on the CIWEM events page after this for you to access. Okay, thanks very much everyone. Cheers.